So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I'm very honored to introduce Mr. James Schwartz from the MEM department at the USU School of Medicine. He is here today to discuss giving motivating and structured feedback to students at a distance using available tools at USU. There will be time for question and answers, but if you have any immediate questions, feel free to use the chat button. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Schwartz now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dina. I appreciate the opportunity to share with the group some of the things that we did over the last probably 6 months. And so first, I want to provide some acknowledgements. So what I'm going to show this morning was from an entire team effort. It was a collaboration between ETI, Dina, and Beth, who's on the call here, as well as Leslie Vorty, Laura Tilley, and Colonel Whiteman, who's the chair of the department. It was really a team effort to come together to pull this activity together for the class of 2023. So some background on this. This activity is part of the Medical Field Practicum 102, commonly known as ACME around the campus, the Advanced Combat Medical Experience. And it's a planning activity that in years past, like most of that activity, if not all of it, is a face-to-face activity. So it's a fairly significant part of the MFP 102. It's the one opportunity where we get to do some of the what we call military medical practice and some planning activities with the class of with the second years. And this, like I said, this was the 2023s. So what I want to show, and again, this is going to be kind of a free-flowing dialogue. So if you got a question or whatever, just either throw it in the chat or just raise your hand or just interrupt me, whatever. We're all family here. So it's what I want to show you is kind of how we did this activity in the face-to-face environment, and then how we converted it over to a virtual environment. So real quick, the background is that we would do the entire class, 180 something students typically, and it would take us about a day to do the entire class during different stages. It would be anywhere from about a 4-hour activity, if I remember correctly, when we did it in the face-to-face. We do half the class in the morning and the other half the class in the afternoon. And it would take anywhere from 6 to 8 faculty typically to run the activity. And what I want to show you real quick is what the activity was when they did it as a face-to-face. Okay, so this is a 48 by 36 inch poster. So if you can imagine being in the MDL, this would cover a good portion of the MDL lab tables. And the concept was that this poster we made each poster for a fire team. So you'd have like 48 of these posters, and a fire team would get around this poster and work through each one of the steps through the poster as a team. They couldn't break out the steps. They couldn't divide and conquer. They had to work through each one of the steps. And each one of these steps kind of equates to a planning process. So we had to take this kind of concept and convert it into a virtual world where we still wanted the fire teams to interact and interact in kind of this hands-on almost experience. And this was a fairly unique experience. At the end of this, you'd have this entire poster filled out by the students. If you look over in this area, these were cutouts. The students would actually cut these out and use them as templates to kind of design patient care areas and that kind of stuff. So that's what the activity looked like when we did it face-to-face. And they had a student guide that would basically direct them through the poster. So that was kind of the concept when we did the face-to-face activity. Kind of what I want to show you now is how we converted that to the virtual world. So the Sakai site was what directed the students. And we would typically start, what I did was I put together a lecture or, just a panopto kind of activity that would direct the students through this virtual activity. So again, this was just pulled in on Panopto. and it would walk them through
So welcome to the TC3
the actual
planning
activity. I'm just going to let this run
So
for
for the
about
next
15
couple of
seconds
minutes, I'm
here.
just going
Can
to
you guys
provide
hear it?
quick introduction and
Yep.
overview of the activity.
Okay.
So the purpose of the activity is familiarization with tactical combat casualty care and the planning process, and to expose you to the fundamental elements and steps that are needed for developing a tactical plan. So our objectives for the activity include analyzing the METTC variables to identify the tasks, training, and logistics requirements needed to accomplish the medical mission.
So that would take the students, it's about an 8-minute long lecture, that would take the student through what the expectations were for the virtual activity. Now, as part of the virtual activity, what I thought was important was that there was some sort of connection between what they were doing in the virtual world and then having something that they could actually have hands-on while they're sitting in their little virtual world trying to do this, working with a team. So we created what we call the TC3 Planning Activity Workbook. So each one of there was like 180 of these workbooks that were produced and were given to the students prior to going through the virtual activity. Now this workbook mirrored exactly what the student was going to do in the virtual activity, but it also what we found is it helped. If you're in this virtual world trying to work with 3 or 4 other team members and you're staring at a computer the whole time, it is nice sometimes to have something hard copy in your hands to kind of try to follow on or refer back to as you're going through the activity. So we produced these and gave them to the students. And this actually took a little bit of what we used to be in the old student guide when we did this face-to-face and put it into the workbook. It had the operational scenario that drove the activity. It had all the graphics that drove the activity. Now, this is also provided to them in the virtual world, but they have a hands-on hard copy while they're doing this at the same time. And then it actually took them through the worksheets that they had to do online as a team. Obviously, it wasn't filled out or anything like that. They could complete this as they went along with their team, along with the digital worksheet, or they could leave it blank as just as a product of having something at the end of the activity that they could refer back to as kind of a go-by. But we found that this was helpful for the students to actually have this hard copy in their hand at the same time that they were going through the virtual activity. So we designed that, and that kind of, like I said, kind of took the place a little bit of the student guide, and also helped do that connection between the virtual world and the online world. The next thing we did was we wanted to make sure that we had total visibility of what the students were doing while they were doing the virtual activity. So let me pull up how we got to that. So what we did was we pulled together what we call the student matrix. So rather than allowing the students to assign their own Hangouts and develop their own Hangouts and then send an invite to a faculty member, we went ahead beforehand and assigned all of the Hangout sites for all the students. So the students just went to this matrix and they found where they were located in the matrix, and they already had their Google site already assigned. They also had a link to their online planning worksheet. Now this did a couple things for us. We had faculty that were assigned to each one of these platoons. So if I'm a faculty member assigned to first platoon, at any given time, I can jump into that Hangout. I don't have to be invited by the student. Student doesn't have to know I'm coming in. I don't have to announce myself. I can jump into that Hangout during a 4-hour block of period. I can jump in there and see what's going on. Maybe I don't necessarily want to see what's going on in the Hangout. Maybe I just want to see how are they progressing on their worksheet. Well, I could come in here and I have access to the worksheet. So I can jump in and I can automatically see what's going on in the worksheet real time. So the students kind of knew that. They knew that, hey, a faculty member could jump in here just like if we were in face-to-face kind of activity. If I'm sitting in the MDL, a faculty member could jump in anytime and kind of see what's going on. So that was really helpful from a faculty perspective to be able to kind of keep track of where the students were, as well as to assist the students. So the student matrix, again, I thought was a good idea to kind of throw in here. So the other thing that we did, and we'll show this here when we get into the worksheet, is we assigned faculty to specific students in specific platoons. So when we get to the worksheet, you'll see this again. But at any time during the activity, if a student had a question, because, I didn't have a faculty member for each team. I didn't have 48 faculty members. I had 8 faculty members. So at any time, if a student had a question where a faculty member wasn't into their Hangout, all the student had to do was go to this Hangout site, right? Let me see if I can get it to jump in there. Just go to this Hangout site, and there was already a faculty member who was sitting in this Hangout. So a faculty member was asked to have this Google's Hangout site open and be available for the student. So at any time, if a student had a question, they could jump into that site, and there was a faculty member already sitting in there to answer to ask the question or to assist them. If faculty members wanted to collaborate, because a lot of times when we're in face-to-face, faculty members will pull together and say, "Hey, I had a student ask me this question. What are your thoughts on this?" Or "How are your students?" Any kind of collaboration for the students. So we also developed what we called the faculty Hangout site. So this was an opportunity, and it was pretty useful, where the faculty would just kind of sit in this site and kind of talk through how the students were doing through the activity. Or if there was a question that they didn't know quite how to handle, they would come in and say, "Hey, Mr. Schwartz, first, second platoon's got a question about this. I don't know how to do it." And I could just jump into second platoon and help them, or whatever fire team that might have been. So we found this to be really beneficial as we set the activity up. All right, so let's jump into what the actual worksheet looked like. So the students had the matrix, they had their assigned Google Hangouts, they had their assigned worksheet, faculty were assigned. So we had that kind of set. All right, so there's the matrix. Again, this is, like I said, this was the Google Hangout site, and this was the worksheet that you could jump in anytime and see what the students were doing specifically on their worksheet. And then this was, I don't know if you guys saw this, this was the faculty piece here. So faculty were assigned to each one of these platoons. Again, a faculty could jump in. If a student needed help, they could jump into this faculty Hangout. There was a faculty member sitting there, and they could answer any kind of question for the student. Okay. Are we tracking now? Everybody good? Okay. Sorry about that. All right. Now let's jump into can everybody see the document? Yes. Okay, cool. All right, so this is the actual document. So when the student went to their Google worksheet, this is what they saw. And I will tell you that it takes a long time to kind of get this right. You have to make sure that, one, you save it as a Google Doc and not as a Word doc. Because if you save it as a Word doc and the student opens up this as a Word doc, then the formatting is not going to be correct. So you want to make sure that when you send this to a student, it's already formatted as a Google Doc. I will tell you that the students are incredibly appreciative when they don't have to deal with any of the formatting issues. So when they open it up and they know it's already formatted properly, that just helps your activity kind of run that much more efficient. So again, this kind of just up here was some just of the administrative kind of stuff that we wanted to make sure the students understood before they went into it. This, again, we saw this one. This was the faculty. This is, if you need assistance anytime during the activity, a student can jump into their respective platoon, and there will be a faculty member sitting there that can assist them. So this was kind of the administrative kind of piece. So now we get into the actual worksheet. So this is taking that poster and converting it into this fillable worksheet. So again, the students would just work through this. They had that activity workbook at home, which had the scenario and had the graphics, which helped provide many where they needed to go for many of the answers here. So they would work through the activity. Now, one of the big issues of this is when you're doing it face to face, you get through an activity, you can stop by a team and you can ask them questions and you can get you can provide some feedback. So that was one of the challenges here, was how do you provide the feedback to the student and how do you keep them on track? Because if you don't provide sometimes that precise feedback, they can start going off track, and next thing you know, the entire activity is kind of in jeopardy. So that was the big key piece, was how do we keep the students on track, and how do we provide that feedback that's needed as they go through the activity. So what we did was we looked at doing this through what we call a Google form, and this kind of served a couple purposes for us. So the students would come through, they would fill this out, And when they would get to a certain point, they would go to what we call the TC Planning Google form. And I'm going to pull that up here and show you what that looks like. So let me, probably can't see the form now, can you? Or can you? Can you see the form, Dean? Yep, okay, you can see the form. Okay, great. So this is what the students saw. They just saw this, you know, they would come through it, you know, they would come through it and have to answer questions. So it would drive them through the entire activity, and they would basically have to answer a question of something they just did to progress through the form, right? So I just want to throw here. Oh, let's see, what's it doing here to me? All right, test. Oh, I hit back. I'm sorry. Next. All right. So they would get done with a certain section, have to answer a question. That kind of shows that, yep, I went through that block of instruction. Here's my answer. And then when they came to this part, they would just jump in to get their feedback. And typically what we did is we went out to the staff and we asked the staff to, golly, we had the staff that would record these sessions for us.
Typically where the staff will
Let's see if it'll work here.
spend the majority of their time during the planning process. Now, one way to think about mission analysis from the medical perspective is to think about it the same way you would approach a patient. So as a patient walks into your clinic, you would start asking questions, you would take a history.
So that's one way that we provide the feedback to the students. So they get to this next step, if I remember correctly. Okay. So this goes back to, if we go back to the worksheet, hopefully everybody can see the worksheet now. Again, so they would finish that step, they would get the feedback, and they'd move on to their next step. This was one of those activities we do with a crossword puzzle. Now, one of the challenges sometimes with this is you don't want them to work ahead. So as an example, in this, typically, they would have had on the poster, they would have had all the clues to work the crossword puzzle already exposed to them. But I didn't want them to see that beforehand. So again, going back to something like this, if you make this step through, then when they get to this point, okay, here's your clues, right? So they can go to the clues, they can answer that. They use the clues to answer the questions. And once they're done with answering the questions, they get the answers, they get the solution set, okay? So they can kind of go back and take a look at that. So that's one way that you kind of walk through this with them. Sometimes you got to be a little tricky about how you want to make sure you display the information. Now, the other great thing about using something like the Google Forms is it's interactive. So in this piece, they had to actually take this icon and position it where they thought they were going to do a casualty collection point. So with the Google form, that allows them to actually move the icon to the point that that you want to put on in position. Again, same here with the TC3, the treatment layout area, right? They can move these icons and develop their own treatment areas. Now, each time they're done with these, right, they would jump back out and there would be a question that would be asked of them through the Google form. So one, you want to make sure that they're going through the worksheet properly, but then you want to provide feedback. The other great thing about this is what we found is it provides that standardized feedback throughout. So if I'm trying to teach 4 platoons in 5 or 6 different MDL rooms, well, maybe I have an SME that's in one room but can't be in all the rooms at the same time. And I'd really like all the students to hear what that SME has to say. Well, that's a challenge. You can't do that because they're all kind of working at different paces. But with something like this, you can have all the students hear that standardized feedback from that SME. For this example, we got our NCOs involved in it. And I went to a corpsman in the department and I said, hey, talk to the students about what it's like to be a corpsman.
All right, so I'm here this afternoon with HM3 Miguel Rodriguez, and HM3 Rodriguez has recently come to us from serving with the Marines. He's an FMF 8404, and he's been in the department now for about 7 months. And
so again, this gives you an opportunity to bring different faculty members in, to bring different perspectives in. And all the students are hearing the same thing, which I thought was very unique and very, very nice for this activity.
James, one of the nice things about the videos that I want to highlight to people is you didn't require people to make videos or to do the videos using any type of high-end technology. You had people making videos on their iPhone. It really was the idea that the content actually kind of was more important than the actual mechanism of the videos. It really was about what they were comfortable with as faculty and what was easiest for them to get you the content.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, so all the videos that were made to support this was either a recording on Google, like a Google Hangout, having a discussion, or somebody kind of doing their own self-recording. You'll see, so just in case in point for what Dee's saying, for this one right here, the students had to actually, determine how they wanted to set up their treatment area. And then after that, they would go back out to the feedback, to the Google form. And this is a recording that I did in our conference room off an iPhone with Colonel Whiteman. And let's see if I can get it to spool up here.
All right, Mr. Schwartz asked me to just kind of describe how I might set this up. There is no right or wrong answer necessarily, as long as it gets the job done.
So what's great about this is we literally did this in the conference room. He used a whiteboard, and I'll just pull down here a little bit to show, so he
That's
used,
pretty
well,
far
let's
to
see.
have everything, all your medical assets. So if you split your BAS and
Let's see if I can get where he starts.
you've got a PA or a doc.
Yeah, so again, we're using a whiteboard, and he's basically just going
Not
through
really
a
going to deal with
display.
them too much initially, okay? Then, who's orchestrating all this? I mean,
So again, it was great to provide all the students standardized feedback from Colonel Whiteman on how to set up a treatment area. So again, the students went through the activity beforehand. They had some pre-readings that kind of showed them and talked a little bit about how to do this. But then after actually going through that activity, they get the feedback from an SME on how to actually do this. So again, the other great thing is, so in this activity, students have to go through and they have to triage patients. We give them a number of patients. They have to triage those patients, and upon the the triage piece, this is.
Now that you've set up your casualty collection
This is
point,
Leslie
you're
Vorty.
prepared to receive patients. 8 patients arrive, and you plan to triage them using your mass casualty algorithm. We're going to use the SALT algorithm to sort and assess our patients. This was my patient. I would observe them closely, despite the fact that their currently triage is delayed. Our next patient, E, can't see after gas explosion with burns to both eyes.
So Colonel Vorty goes through each one of the patients and walks the students on why that patient was triaged the way it was, right? So I will tell you, in the past, we've never been able to do something like this. We've had physicians kind of walking around. We give them a faculty guide, and the physicians kind of use that faculty guide to talk the students through each one of the patients. Now we know that there's a standardized response and feedback given to all the students. Now, what I want to show is the backside of the Google form. So we know that students have to go through and answer questions. One of the things the students had to do was they had to go in and put in where they thought those patients were triaged before they got the feedback. And the great thing about doing something like this is when I come into and I look at the responses, this now gives me an opportunity to see how well are the students doing with the triage. So I can actually see, like, where did the students say casualty A was? So most of the students got this one correct, right? Casualty D, they obviously had a problem with. Some of the students thought the casualty D was delayed, others thought the casualty D was minimal. So you can actually come back and take a look to see how are the students actually doing through the activity? Are they getting these concepts? And this activity obviously runs in or parallels or nests, I should say, with most of our other curriculum, like the combat medical skills curriculum. So again, doing something like this gives you the opportunity to actually go in and take a look to see how are the students doing with many of these skill sets.
So
Again,
James,
yeah.
Dr. has written in the chat, this is really impressive, but how did you ensure the students didn't jump ahead to see the correct answers? So you may want to go over the requirement piece again.
How they did not jump ahead to see, right. So again, they had to, in order to get, that's a good point, ma'am. So in order to get to the next slide in this, right, it was a requirement. So let me show you real quick here. Let me just put some stuff in here so we can show this. Let me see, area layout, that's the Colonel Whiteman piece, okay. So as an example, so here's where they had to triage their patients. So they had to answer this question before they got the feedback, right? So if I don't answer this, it's not going to let me go forward. Does that make sense? So the next slide, let me just see if I can do this real quick. The next slide is the feedback slide. There's Colonel Vorty's feedback right there. So you made them, in order to drive through this, they had to answer the questions and then they would get the feedback. Does that help? Yeah, good question. Okay. So
One
yep.
other nice point about him requiring the students to actually list their answers was that Mr. Schwartz was able to go back afterwards and see where the discrepancies in learning were occurring. And he could actually go back and look at the analytics to see, well, was it a patient description that were causing the students possibly to move over? You know, what were the things that were causing students problems? What was the content that supported those responses, and where did he see any commonalities amongst students who were making the same mistakes? Using the forms like that allows them to see that holistically across the class, which is different than if he had done it in the classroom, because you wouldn't really know that until you got everybody together to talk about what type of feedback was given, or to look. It would be way after the actual learning event happened, whereas here we could talk about it in real time.
Yep, good point.
Yeah, I mean, another interesting point is, because they were working on it together in their groups, but you also didn't have that kind of bleed over that you would have in the MDLs, right? Where maybe they hear what someone else says, they have to proceed with their own group in their own way.
Yeah, no, right. They're in their own little pod, right? They're by themselves working through this, like you said. Yeah, and typically if we're doing this in the MDL, there's at least 4 teams in the MDL that are working on this simultaneously. So that's an excellent point. The other great thing is I could take that data and give it to like Captain Rudensky, who's in charge of the combat medical skills piece, which teaches triage. So she can actually glean some of this, you know, from the students to see, okay, I see where the students are at with some of these skill sets. The other piece that's really nice about doing something like this is, you heard Leslie Vorty talk about, hey, we're going to use the SALT triage method. Well, if a student is like, I'm not too sure if I remember what the SALT triage method was. Well, again, you can put that reference right into the document, and the students can just pull that reference right up and you have a quick refresher on the SALT triage method, right? Let's see if this thing pulls up here. So again, it's quick, right? It's a page and a half. Students can look at that and go, okay, I remember how to do the SALT triage method. So that's the other great thing about this. The other one that was kind of unique about this is we wanted the students to do, as an example, a TC3 card. So again, what they had to do was actually download the card. And once they downloaded the card, they actually had to upload the card as part of their response to us. So again, it's in the, I have to show, well, I can show it on the back side here. So if you look on the back side, here's all the TC3 cards. So if I want to see, you know, does the student really understand how to, one, complete the TC3 card, and are they putting the correct, you know, clinical, you know, diagnoses and all those kinds of things into the card? I can actually go in and now and take a look at the hard copy of the card by team and see exactly what they've done. Again, when we did this face-to-face, we didn't actually have that capability, but now we actually, with this, we can actually do things like this. Again, going through and doing some triage things with the evacuation piece. One of the neat things that we did here was we made them do a 9-line. Now, I really wanted them to have to do some sort of interaction with the faculty. So what we made them do was do the 9-line, and then they had to use, if you remember, they had that faculty, that site where if they had a question, they could go to that site. Well, they had to go to that site and actually transmit a 9-line call to the faculty member to get through the site. And that was, you know, that was unique for some of the students to have to do that. And what was interesting is who they elected to make the calls. Typically, it would be like a prior service person, and we'd say, "Oh no, you're no longer here. Give me somebody else to do the call." So there was some forced interaction there that we had with the faculty and the students, where they actually had to come back in and make the call to the faculty. Again, this gives you an opportunity, you know, with these kinds of with this document, you can move things around and you can manipulate things, right? Again, that going back to the Google Doc, they kind of help you assist that piece. The last piece they had to do here was do some pre-mission or some parallel mission planning, and then they had 3 questions that we were upfront with them. We told them, hey, as you go through this activity, these are 3 for further thought questions that we're going to ask you to do on Sakai. So just real quick, I want to just show you. So this is actually this is a team, right? So the other great thing is by doing this over the Google Form piece, I now have all these teams. I have them all. They're all digitized. They're all here. I have these for continuity's sake. So if I want to go back and see, hey, were all the students, you know, did they have difficult times in what areas, or how did they respond to whatever? I can go back and take a look at that. So this is one group. Just wanted to show this is one group going through the activity and completing it. You can see here's how they filled out, how they did their treatment areas. Again, their evacuation piece and their triage piece. We'd have to go in and pull their card up, but we can do that. Here's their 9-line. So, you know, as far as the technology with the Google Doc, it works actually really, really well to kind of, you know, use this and have the students work together to pull this together.
James, Heather
yes,
wants to know, did you use Google Docs for everything?
Say that last part.
Did you use Google Docs for everything? Now you had Panopto as well, but.
Yeah, so the recordings were done with Panopto. Google Doc was primarily for the worksheet. Google Form was for the feedback, you know, where we made them put in information and then we would provide that feedback through a Google Form. Most of my references and things like that, if you, like when you saw that SALT triage, right, that was a PDF. If I created something like a Word doc, I would typically convert that to a Google Doc if they wanted to use that as a reference, if that makes sense. Does that answer the question, ma'am?
Yes. And then were your videos, were they uploaded into Panopto and then you linked to them in the Google Docs, or how did that work? When you had the video that you shot from the iPhone, did you load that to Panopto?
Yep.
And then did you link to that through the docs?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, so complicated.
No, it's actually not. So if you go into Panopto and all you do is you copy the link address,
mm-hmm.
and then you just go right into the Google Doc, and Google Doc will let you hyperlink it straight in. So the only key is you have to make sure you have the permissions set appropriately on the Panopto recording, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if a student isn't given permission when they hit that link, it's not going to let them see that Panopto recording.
Right.
So that's the other piece, is you got to make sure you have the permissions set appropriately when you're doing the recordings. The other piece go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say one other thing, Dr. Johnson and everybody. We had a long discussion about, should we track who is actually entering information? Should we require different people to enter information so that we can see who worked on what piece possibly? It was a big kind of pedagogical discussion there in terms of what did we want to track and what did we want to know. But the groups were small enough and you could pop in any time and listen to the conversation that you really didn't, I didn't think there was amongst the group in that conversation, nobody really felt like there was a need to actually require different people to do different tasks. Now, you know, because you could hear and you could jump in and you could get the questions. And so that was part of the planning process. And speaking of planning, Dr. Pak has said, this is absolutely phenomenal. Question, about how long did it take you to develop all of these forms, and was the ETI team or someone else able to help you with this? It's clearly a best practice and incredibly impressive.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Dr. Pak. We were talking about this morning, actually. I probably started this activity in May, and the activity was done August 7th. But I mean, I didn't spend, every waking hour on the activity, but it took probably a good 3 months to kind of pull things together. The big thing is, because I was asking other faculty members to do the recordings and provide the feedback, you got to be really respectful of their time, right? So I wanted to make sure that I gave them enough time to do the recordings. So that takes a little bit of planning. And, if you're going to do something like this, obviously a project timeline is probably the best thing to do. Because the other thing that was important was just doing a little bit of pilot. Like, we'd get through a little bit of the worksheet and I'd send it out to a trusted group like Dina and Beth and Leslie and Laura. And I'd say, hey, just take a look at this, and does it make sense if you were a student trying to do this? Because remember, most of it's got to be self-directed, because I don't have a faculty member standing over you watching you do this. So it has to be something that I feel a student or a team of students can work through and not get frustrated. Because if they get frustrated, they're just going to throw their hands up and say, this is just stupid. That took a long time to kind of go back and forth to say, does it work or does not? Now that doesn't work. That doesn't make sense. Let's not do it that way. So it probably took us a good 3 months to to pull it together.
The worksheet that you had that you said it had like lots of blocks and it had black and blue writing, where you said you could see what different people were working on. What was that? How did you do that?
Oh, you're talking about the matrix itself.
It was early in your presentation.
Yeah, you're talking, hang on real quick. You're talking this document?
Yes.
Yeah, so all this is, Heather, are hyperlinks. So this is a little,
okay.
So
it's sort of like how they do for Bedside Bench and Beyond, just where everybody is. Mm-hmm. Like there's links to Zoom meets. This is to Zoom.
Yeah, so these are right. I used Google. I mean, at that time, I think we were just starting to use Zoom. So, I elected just to use Google.
Okay.
Now, what I had to do is you had to go out and create 46 different Google sites, right? Mm-hmm. Now, here's the other thing you got to think about here. These sites do not stay active forever. They only stay active for something like 90 days, I think.
Oh, really?
So if you plan it too far ahead and you send this out, the site could be dead. So you have to make sure that you plan it so that your site is still going to be active when you send it out to the students. The other piece that I didn't show here, but I'll show real quick is, what we created was, can everybody see this? Can see the drive? I don't know if they can see the drive.
Not yet.
Nope. Let me get to the.
You're still sharing the table.
What's that?
You're still sharing the matrix.
How about this? Can you see the drive?
Yep.
Okay, so the other piece, you remember you saw the Google site, and then under that was their specific worksheet, right? So if you look here, this is where all those worksheets are at. So you have to come in here and pull, what is the actual link to this worksheet, and then link it specifically to that team. That takes a little bit of time, but once you get it set, like I said, at any time during the activity, I could jump into this worksheet right here, and I could see what they were doing. I could see where they were at. I could see, did I think they were filling it in properly? Were they putting enough effort? Whatever, right? So those kinds of little details do take a lot of time, and that's part of going through the pilot process. How we kind of figured out some of that stuff. It's like, okay, we probably need to do it this way versus whatever another way.
One of the I know, Dr. Pluck, you have another question, so I'm going to get to that in just a sec. But one of the really interesting pieces of this that I felt as somebody who wasn't a content expert in this field was that I was able to really look at it with fresh eyes and talk about when something didn't make sense to me or wording seemed confusing. And I think getting people on board who may not be the content experts when you're pilot testing something like this, who are willing to provide you the honest feedback and are comfortable doing that, can really help expand on the directions you're providing to the students as they go through this process and help you see possible pitfalls along the way. Dr. Pock's question was, how many faculty did you need to have on standby to answer the A&E and other live transmissions? I also want to note before you get to that, we do have a feedback link on this session, and we'll be starting to offer that as part of our normal teaching with technology orientation. So if you could go into the chat and provide us some feedback on this session, we'd really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody, and on to Dr. Pock's question. So once again, how many faculty did you need to have on standby to answer the A&E and other live transmissions?
So I had, we had one faculty member per platoon is what we did. So I had eight faculty members. That was the optimal. Now I'll tell you that I didn't have that. I think myself and Leslie Vorty covered down on 2 platoons, but optimally I wanted to have one per platoon. And I figured that, and I think this worked out well. If it was done well enough, or it was self-directed, right, where the students could get through the activity pretty much by themselves with little guidance from an outside faculty member, then I didn't feel like I needed a whole bunch of faculty to support it, because I had that feedback piece already, right? So if the student went in there and didn't triage a patient correctly, well, all they had to do was listen to Leslie Vorty's talk about, hey, here's why you triaged the way you should have triaged. Then it really didn't require another faculty member to come behind, and maybe it did. Maybe there were some students who wanted a further explanation, but the feedback was done well enough that I think most of the students, if not all the students, felt like, okay, I get it. I understand why that was the way it is. And again, just to reiterate, the one piece here is what's really nice is when you go back and take a look at, I'm just going to share this one last time, and then I'll jump off of this. When you go back and look at the Google Doc or the Google form, this really gives you a good sense of where the students were and how well they were doing through the activity. This kind of gives you a sense on, are they answering it correctly, or where are students having problems? And if you see, most of the students are pretty consistent about their activities. And then again, if you wanted some, this was having to do with your mission statement. That was an important one to me. Do they understand how to write a mission statement? So the great thing about this is I have all of this in one shot, right? I don't have to go through Sakai digging for 48 different responses in Sakai. I have everything right here in a worksheet, and folks who have used Google Forms know you can just download this into a spreadsheet, and you kind of already have this, at your disposal. So I thought that was nice. So just to kind of close it up here, we already talked about the project timeline and how long it kind of took us. The important thing is remember others' schedules. If you're going to ask folks to help you with something like this, you just got to be really attuned to their schedule, and then obviously provide some fairly specific guidance. One of the things I did was I provided a template. If I wanted them to provide slides, I gave them a template that I asked them to use so that all the slides look the same. I didn't want one faculty member throwing out there some quirky looking stuff versus something else. So I provided a template to try to keep the continuity, to keep it streamlined. Again, thought that it was standardized feedback, which was just incredibly important. And then the other piece is we gained curricular time from this. What would it take me an entire day to teach to the 2023s only took me 4 hours. I was able to knock out the entire class in 4 hour time. So you gain some curricular time where we could look at that and go, okay, what else are we going to do with that other 4 hours now? We gained 4 hours. Is there something else that we can use that time for? And then the last thing is, where do we go from here? So there's some debate. There's some really nice things that this allowed us to do. And so the question now is, okay, is face-to-face the best way to teach this? Or is it potentially, in the virtual environment, or probably is it a hybrid, right? Do we figure out a hybrid on how to do this, in the future? So,
James, you may want to talk about the student feedback, because that really, I think, highlighted the success of the student experience within this.
Well, we did do some student feedback with the overall ACME course, and for this activity, there was fairly strong feedback from the students going through the course. And I think one of the biggest, key pieces of this was, I didn't necessarily have any students come back to say that the activity was frustrating to them, because there was a lot going on in the activity that we wanted the students to try to be able to do. I mean, we basically wanted them to be able to complete that poster that we had done in the face-to-face activity, but just do that in a virtual activity. And I think most of the students, if not all, felt like, hey, it was done well enough where we were able to get through it, and they got valuable feedback, from listening to SMEs as they went through the activity. So, any other questions? Any other Beth, Dina, any other comments from your side?
No, I think, from an ETI support perspective, the planning piece of all of this and the thinking through the what got yous and how to, support the integration of the tools was one of the big picture issues that were discussed as a team early on. And I can't overemphasize, especially since James needed to ask people to do these videos, just how early he did that in the process. We didn't ask people to do any special editing. We didn't ask, what we really cared about was consistency and a concise response to the answer. And he really did a nice job of making sure those happen. He didn't say it, but I'm sure he had to send out a few little reminders to people, maybe. But I'm not throwing anybody under the bus there. So feel free to take yourself off mute if you have any other questions. We're almost up to the hour here.
I'll throw one other quick thing out there that made it nice, is because, as an example, if I asked Laura Tilley I asked her to do the evacuation piece for this and talk through how you would evacuate the patients and what order and those kinds of things. And I know her and the other docs in the department got together to really have a good discussion about, okay, if we're going to put this out standardized, what are some of the key points that we want to talk about? So, it was really a team effort to kind of come together and push out that standardized response and feedback. So I felt like that was also another really nice addition to this, that the faculty could really come together and say, okay, I'm going to be the spokesperson for this, but let's have a hard discussion about what we think the students need to hear when they get this feedback. So
the other thing that I think that does, James, is it lets them do it on their time, right? If you do this classroom, you had to get them all in the same place at the same time. Whereas for this, you could say, hey, sometime in the next 2 weeks, we want you to do this. And then you, as you said, you needed 8 people available, but not in the classroom with the students physically that whole time. So it did give the faculty some of their own time back. So it enabled them to help you at their own pace, as opposed to on the schedule that you had to set for them as you would in the classroom.
Again, feel free to take yourself off mute if you have any questions.
Hey, no questions, but this is incredibly impressive. Thanks so much for sharing it.
Thanks, Dr. Pak. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And just a call out to everybody left on the phone. If you have any ideas for a teaching with technology piece that you would like to or have seen or heard about another faculty doing, we'd be happy to talk to people about opportunities. We are trying to look for faculty. If you happen to know of anybody who, besides Mr. Schwartz here, because we don't want to hit him up too many times, for breakout rooms, because we're feeling there's a lot of questions about how to do breakout rooms well and how to set them up. So if anybody out there knows of anybody who's doing great stuff with breakout rooms, we'd love to talk to them. We know Mr. Schwartz really hit it out of the park, but we thought this would be a great first piece to kind of bridge that. Don't forget, Linda put in the survey, so we'd love your feedback. And Mr. Schwartz, we can't thank you enough for sharing this with everybody. It was a great project. We were quite excited and honored to be part of it.
Yeah, no, again, and I just want to reiterate my thanks to the ETI team and to, you know, our department faculty, Laura and Leslie and Colonel Whiteman and the folks who, it was really a team effort to put something like this together. So thanks to everybody who was really part of it. So, all right.
Safe, everybody.